You're listening to another episode of the Fredericksburg Strong podcast. This is a local forum to inform and entertain our community, discuss local news, promote small businesses, and celebrate our hometown heroes with a little dose of humor to keep you entertained. Our mission is simple: to keep Fredericksburg strong. Today's podcast is powered by Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai of Fredericksburg. And now, here's your host, Tim Pohanka.
Hello everybody, it's Tim Pohanka. It is a Fredericksburg Strong episode. We keep trying to bring you lots of great information, not just about the community, but about what we can do to help you and businesses. And I've got two great guests with me. Thank you, Tom, for joining us.
No problem, Tim. Good to see you.
And you brought someone for us.
I did. We're excited to bring this to your show with Tony Hero is a Nielsen representative, and he is just a wealth of knowledge. If people are familiar with the PPM program, PPM is where the people meters, and that's how they see who's listening to the radio and what markets. He was one of the guys that helped to get that off the ground. But he's been involved in a lot of this COVID information and research, and I thought it would be great for your viewers to actually hear what's really going on with buying and shopping. Not only in the Fredericksburg area, but nationwide, and it kind of debunks a lot of things that we might be seeing and reading on Facebook and social media and whatnot about radio habits or TV habits. He can explain all that to us.
You know, it's funny you should bring that up because we have seen some crazy numbers for ourselves on Facebook, on radio. I mean, so why don't you give us a little? Well, number one, let's talk about what Nielsen really is, for people who don't really know what Nielsen is.
Sure. Nielsen started out as a television ratings company. They'll tell you what television show is the number one rated show in America, how many viewers a show has. It all started as television. And then about 3 years ago, Tony, you can correct me, but about 3 years ago, they bought Arbitron, which was the authority in radio ratings. So when they bought them, Nielsen now is radio and television. And they've done some tremendous work, Tim, dealing with big companies like Procter & Gamble and getting them to see the power of radio and television and how mixing that in with their social media has just made some of these products that Procter & Gamble offer, made them just skyrocket because a lot of companies were making a choice. They were either thinking just radio or just television or just social media. And Nielsen was really in the forefront of explaining to companies how it all works together. And I think that's what Tony can share with us today as well.
So Tony, it brings up a really good point. When we start looking at advertising trends, at least for us, one of the big items that we look at, or I start to look at now, is multi-channel advertising. How can I spread my message over multiple media and pick up that reach and frequency that I need? So how does that all work together?
You know, I work with a lot of the national ad agencies and a lot of the major networks, and everything has up to this point been very siloed. Everybody looks at radio in kind of one kind of workflow, and radio and television another, and digital and social. And now we're starting to bring it together. And as Tom was saying, we showed like Procter & Gamble how we could add one media to another, and you could actually get better returns. It's like 1 + 1 = 3. And we basically use all of the data that we collect from all of the Nielsen households in all the different types of things that we measure. And it really is, you're right, you're doing the exact same thing that Procter & Gamble is, which is exploring the multi-channel options.
In today's day and age, though, we've got more than just one. In the past, it's been kind of a carpet bomb approach, where I found an advertising book, an ad planner from 1992. And this 1992 ad planner had it said the budget for internet was like $1,000, and the budget for newspaper was some like $60,000. It was when you think of where we are in a very short period of time, but you can't carpet bomb anymore. And even in radio advertising and TV advertising, you can't. What are some of the unique trends that people can do? Because if we really try to make it local, how can a smaller business, when we talk Procter and Gamble, hey, we would all like to have P&G's advertising budget. Sure. I hate to even think what it is. But when you bring it down more to the local area, how can these local businesses really take advantage of that?
Well, I guess I would start by saying that even though we're talking about national brands, there's a lot of tactics that they employ that a local business could use too. Like during COVID, it's been really challenging. There's been a lot of cutback in ad spend because the messaging has changed. You're not telling people come in for this promotion because shelves might be empty. So they've had to shift the messaging of the campaigns. So the one that's been really crazy is, I don't know if you've seen, there's been ads for Charmin that have been on their air, on TV, radio, digital, and you can't even buy toilet paper during the breakout. Do you know why that is? Do you know why they continue to advertise even though there's been a disruption in the supply chain? They basically need to keep their brand going. And It's like if you're flying an airplane and you cut the engine, it's only a matter of time before you plow right into the ground. You've got to keep the engines running, and you got to keep staying out there, because if you don't, there's a lot of disruption happening right now. Consumers have a lot more choices because they're thrown out of their normal behaviors. So they're experimenting with other brands. They might want to shop somewhere else because it's not convenient anymore to do what they used to do because so much has changed. So for marketers that want to preserve their market position, whether that's a local restaurant, a car dealer, or a major national brand, they've really got to keep their foot on the pedal.
So it's interesting you say that about keeping their brand awareness up, but what does that say about the loyal customers that they have? One, and a lot of what I saw, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, that I saw during this COVID time has been more of okay, we're going to try to really work with our current customer base. So we kind of looked inside versus looking outside.
That's just great business 101. I mean, you should always be protecting the core. It works the same way for Tom's listeners on his stations, and it's the same for any business. That is, the 80-20 rule of business is there's 20% of your customers that deliver 80% of your sales, and they are the most important. So that's probably where things should start. But now people are starting to get more aggressive and looking at how they can gain market share and take advantage of competitive situations when their competitors are not paying attention.
So when you look locally, Tom, how does radio really fit in? If I'm a small, look, I know what I spend on a monthly basis. And, when you start to look at other restaurants and other places, people who I've spoken with, if they saw the money that we spend, they go, holy cow.
Right.
How can someone really break into radio in a budget and still have time or even the understanding to do other things?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've been really responsive to locally is recovery packages involving radio, helping small businesses either stay on the radio or get on the radio. And with the recovery packages, it helps to get that frequency that they need for it to be effective. Because the last thing that you want to do locally for a radio station, because it could be the kiss of death, is to sell somebody an ad schedule, a small business, and you sell them $100 worth of ads, and they think it's going to bring in thousands and thousands of dollars. And basically, you've just taken that person's money. So the ability to give somebody a schedule that's going to be effective so that they can get results and grow and build. And I think as Tony mentioned to me on the phone a couple of days ago, that right now with COVID and the phases that we're in, there's still 3 buckets of consumers. And I'll let him explain that to you, but there's certain buckets that we can go after to get business, and there's certain buckets that are still off limits. And I think Tony probably has a better explanation of that.
Okay.
Yeah, just like Tim was saying, you've got your core customers. We've taken a different approach. So the analysis that we did is back in the end of April, so about 6 weeks ago, we did a study and we asked people their opinions about what's going on in their community with the virus. And we asked them lots of questions about their level of concern. Do you feel safe? Are you concerned about loved ones? Do you think businesses are going to reopen? All these things. And based on those responses, we put people into 3 different buckets. One group we're labeling the ready to go group. This is the most aggressive group. These are the people that were hitting the beaches the day they were open. On the other side of the spectrum, we have those who we are calling the wait and see group. They're the more cautious group, probably the ones with compromised immune systems, maybe the elderly, just really afraid and don't want to be the first ones out the door. And then anybody in the middle, we're calling proceed with caution. They're somewhere in between the extremes. And those were 3 different groups that were equally sized about 6 weeks ago. We did the same study a month later at the end of May, so only 2 weeks ago, and we saw that the group of people in the ready to go group, it almost doubled. It's more than half now that feel more comfortable, less concerned. The group that was the wait and see group that was extremely concerned, that group shrank by a third. It's only 11% of the people in our sample now that are that concerned. And another third are still that proceed with caution. So people are kind of shifting throughout that group, and it's that ready to go group. Those are the ones that are making reservations at restaurants as soon as they can because they're sick of making their own meals. And these are the ones who delayed purchases, and now they're going back into the store to get the goods and services that they need. So a lot of that consumer demand is pent up. It's still there. It's just we're looking at consumers through 3 different lenses based on how eager they are to go out and spend money in the community.
So when you look at that, you've got, when you say you're ready to go, your middle cautious people and your wait and see. One of the advantages I had is I've sit on one of Nissan's national marketing subcommittees. So we talk about the whole entire brand with Nissan. And they did research, and the research that they said, based upon past, we'll call them incidents in the country, it kind of gives you a timeline as to when it's acceptable to be back in market. But that's not always the case for all 100% of these consumers, as you were talking about. So if you're advertising, do you think you have a tendency to turn people off if you're trying to go after the ready to go group when you still have a large wait and see group?
I don't think it's going to turn them off. It just goes back to your point that you have a lot of different channels that you can employ. And we found that this ready to go group, the first ones out the door, they actually tend to be younger, their families, they are more likely to be employed and more likely to be out of the home. And they're also more likely to be heavy radio listeners. So radio is actually a good fit for the people that are the more active consumers that are coming out first. Conversely, the wait and see group tend to be older, tend to be heavier consumers of television. So the messaging that a brand is going to have on television is going to be seen by proportionately more of these more cautious people. So that brand message could be different on the different media.
Okay. So, again, we go back, bringing this back to local and small businesses. It's a lot of information we've just put out there.
It is.
I mean, it's clear as mud sometimes when you start to think about, hey, how do I go about it? How do I do that? You talked about not wanting to take someone's $100 and let them think they're going to get a great return. All these customers are going to come in. So how long does it take to build a brand image? Because that's really what you're talking about. We're not talking about, hey, come buy something for $69.95. It's a one-time deal. It's good for 30 or 10 days or whatever. But you're talking about building a brand that people would recognize over a long period of time. So if I'm a restaurant, or if I'm a bike shop, or if I'm, some of these businesses, how can they do that? What's that going to look like for them?
Yeah, I think A lot of businesses, and we were surprised during this whole shutdown, businesses that were considered essential stayed on because they didn't want to lose all that branding that they had spent so much money on to develop. The businesses that had to shut down, once they figured out a way to generate income in some way, shape, or form, whether it was that restaurant that could only do carry out, they jumped back on because they did not want to lose all the traction from previous spends, and whether that was on radio or whatever form of media they used, you can't lose that traction. We often use the term, with Kleenex. Kleenex is a household brand, but it's really not the name of the product. And they did that because they've been branding us for the last 60 years. People like that they just don't stop because they know that consumers can change their minds quickly, and all of a sudden a household brand can lose traction in a heartbeat when they go away. So I think people are anxious to get back on, and whether that's back on radio, television, they're anxious to get going because they don't want to lose the traction and all the time that they spent building up their local brand.
So again, if I'm trying to be there, what should someone's first contact be when they reach out to you? What should they do?
The first thing that we have to do is we're back to doing cost analysis and needs analysis. We find out what they're able to do, where they've been in the last 6-8 weeks of the shutdown, and how they're going to move forward, and whether they're 100% open or how they're going to do business. And some have changed their business models forever. But say for instance, when the dentist office opened up, we had a lot of dentists on the air. Now that they're open back up, we had to see exactly how they were going to be able to serve the community. And, if it's advertising, sit in your car and we'll text you when it's time to come in and you have to mask up. Some of it's more of a learning how to be a new consumer. And it really depends on that one-on-one conversation of where that business is, where they need to go, and how they're going to do business moving forward. And then we figure out how we're going to write the message, because the message is the key. A great radio station writing a bad commercial for a good business is not going to be good for that business. You can't deliver customers. But even a bad radio station with no listeners, if they have a great message, they're going to get results. And it's all about the message. So that's what we're focusing on now, especially for our local consumers, is making sure that we have the right message, telling people in the community how that business is doing business now, and how you can do business with them, what their new hours are. Maybe through this shutdown, they had to develop a new website because they didn't offer online ordering. We've had a lot of that. We've had businesses that we've had to develop their websites so that they could do that, so that they could do business during the shutdown. So it's like an octopus. I mean, there's arms
Tom,
going in every direction.
I'll just add in from Colorado, we've also heard a lot of radio stations reminding people which businesses are open and providing a public service, because a lot of these small businesses, like you said, they haven't been able to update their website. They have a graphic designer that handles that, who's not even employed. So there's a lot of disruption, and consumers just want to know if they should even go to those businesses. They're not going to make the trip if they're going to be closed. So I think there's still a lot of that happening. Has that been happening in the Mid-Atlantic too?
Yeah, there's been a lot of trying to understand how you can do business with somebody. And what we've done locally, we've done a lot of shop local campaigns, and we've listed a lot of the restaurants that were just doing takeout and curbside. It was just all about anybody who was open and could do business. We were trying to get the word out that they were open. That's been a big push of ours, is trying to keep local businesses going, whether they could afford it or not. We were just putting the information out on the air, and just making sure that the consumers did have as much information about a business being open or not open, either on our radio or on our website. But that's been a big battle cry for us, is especially with the stimulus money coming in town. We wanted to make sure that our consumers spent that locally, and it didn't go to the giant A. And that's been a big push for us, because as we keep saying locally, Amazon doesn't support your kid's baseball team. So we wanted that stimulus money to stay local. So that we had a big push for that.
Yeah, when you look at a lot of you mentioned about the public service that your radio station provides. And you guys do, without a doubt. PSAs, people can come there all the time. But where does news fit into this?
But one of the things that we did, and this is pretty bold move, I think, for us and a couple other music intensive stations, is we actually partnered with WTOP out of Washington, and they helped to provide news for the rest of the day. And what we found from our listeners is they wanted some news, but they didn't want to be bombarded with X amount of deaths today from COVID-19. They looked at us as entertainment and a release from all that information. So we gave some, but we didn't really want to overdo it with news, because I think if you wanted that, if you were really one of these people that have been afraid to go out of your house and you've been glued to your phone or your television trying to get every piece of COVID information you can, that's that one bucket that we really couldn't help, because they just want it 24/7. Give me the news, give me the news. But for people who just want to stay informed but be entertained, I think that we gave them news all day long. We stopped that at the end of May and pretty much went back to just our regular newscast.
So when you look at it today, go ahead, please, go ahead, jump in.
I was just going to add, from a national perspective, the appetite for news on the radio really jumped during the crisis. And there's a difference between national news and local news. And the appetite for local news was much higher, because the impact of the virus was not uniform. What was happening in New York might not be happening in DC, and it's certainly not happening in Phoenix or Salt Lake. So the need for relevant, local, accurate information has probably never been higher than during this COVID outbreak. And we also saw that even though people were, staying at home, quarantined, we saw a 60% increase in streaming of the news to homes that would normally not, they would normally be listening at home or at work or in their car. So the news appetite was very strong throughout this outbreak.
So, I look at that, and I'm trying to look at it the lens not just in COVID, but now in the social lens that we're in about George Floyd protests, the whole Black Lives Matters movement that's going on, and all of the news that's coming out local. Mm-hmm. So when you look at COVID, and to your point, Tony, about it really being local, it's one thing to hear the governor of New York on a daily basis talk about what's going on in the state of New York and how quickly or how easily that's being broadcast by CNN or whatnot. But when it came time to our local governor, that information was on Facebook. Mm-hmm. So where was the ability to get that information? The same thing now with some of the protest movements and the concerns that are going on there. Where is that ability to get that local? I think that's another area where, the news plays a part for two reasons. Number one, because people want to be informed, but it's a medium to get advertising dollars in.
Right. We actually just had a meeting about this on Friday about actually having almost two types of newscast. One is the news and information about COVID and things of that nature. The other being more of a community news, like that lighter news. So we're actually thinking about putting both of those on, and we just have to figure out the times and where that information is going to come from. But there's a lot of good community information that doesn't get out there through PSAs and other things that we feel like could be capsulized in a 60-second newscast, and we're actually looking at that direction.
So when you start to look at putting all of these things together, and again, going back into the advertising and what goes on, you'd mentioned about an octopus. It's like an octopus, and it really is. So I'm very lucky. I grew up in the car business. You grow tentacles every year, it appears, and you're trying to learn new skills and you're juggling it. But I've had the benefit of a 100-year-old company, a father, a great uncle, a cousin, all of the other managers that came before me that kind of helped bring me along and give me that information. I'm just starting out on a new business. I've got no earthly idea. You guys are more than just hey, we put your ad on the radio. You do help with the production. You do help with the copy. You can help with learning other sources of advertising. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. One of the things radio has had to grow and develop, and one of the things is digital advertising. And I think Tony can probably address this as well. Radio and digital are working very well together. And because we have a digital department where we can manage somebody's Facebook page, somebody, especially small business owners, they know what they want to accomplish. They're all not marketing specialists, and that's where I think someone locally like us can come in. Is they can deal with, say, Kelly. They can not only get their radio put together, but they can also get all of their digital marketing and get it working together. And when it's working together, that's when it works. And getting the we have so many people who still don't even have a website, or they have a website and it only looks great on a desktop, but it doesn't go down to mobile, which nowadays is useless.
Yeah, if it's not responsive, it doesn't matter.
So that's one of the beauties of radio. It's been able to adapt, and as you know, I mean, radio is getting challenged from all over these other arenas. Pandora and Spotify. What does that bring to the table? How is that, again, social media had radio on its deathbed because of these platforms. And it didn't happen. It's not going to happen because radio is local. And radio is where you're going to find out about, what's happening at the YMCA and what fundraiser. The radio is the one that's going to go out, and just like we did 3 weeks ago, we stood in a parking lot for 3 hours and collected 900 pounds of food for the Fredericksburg Food Bank. Those are the types of things that local radio does, and it's too big of an impact for it to go anywhere. So all we had to do was evolve, and we had to pick up these other arms of advertising so that when you want to advertise and you want to put this big campaign together, you don't have to sit there in front of 8 different reps from 8 different types of media to put this together. You can deal with 1 or 2 people and get it done. And I think that's one of the beauties of where radio is headed, because it's very easy to adapt it with other media.
So you mentioned about being out. Go ahead, Tony. Do you want to jump in?
I'm just going to add my 2 cents from a brand, from a purchase consideration standpoint, the purchase funnel. All brands, all businesses look at influencing their customers and getting them to consider something. Radio is great. Broadcast media is great at the top of the funnel, but getting consumers to act and to visit a website, to bring them further down the funnel and get them closer to purchase, that's where you can leverage digital. And what Tom is doing is taking kind of the best of both worlds of leveraging the top of the funnel, getting people in and interested in a business, casting a very wide net, and then activating that interest with the digital channels.
And you mentioned influence, Tony, and you mentioned it slightly. The work of your local disc jockey, which is now more of your local personality, is incredibly important.
Sure. And
how well they engage inside a community. You have pretty active hosts, don't you?
Yeah, and that's the thing, during the shutdown, being live and local, a lot of radio stations are in a lot of trouble around the country because they're not live. They've got one guy in a major market that is feeding the same voice tracks to about 20 different stations. And they have no idea even how to say the word Lafayette Boulevard. They're not local. Our folks are local. from a COVID standpoint, they came to work every day at 5 a.m. and our salespeople worked from home. But all of our broadcasters who were on the radio, they were there every single day. I don't think any of them called in at any time to need a break. We gave them a break. But being live and local is the key to radio's future. And I think, not to throw them under the table, but I think the iHearts of the world, the giant companies that just went around the country gobbling up all these stations, thought it would be really easy just to have these minimum staffs somewhere else and just feed all this information to local stations. It doesn't work.
Well, if that was the case, then satellite
radio.
radio would be the number one thing and no one else would be there.
Right.
And outside of the Howard Stern show, I can't really think of anyone else that's really held,
right,
who's held anything in that regard.
Right. And you know, the local broadcasters, the Crystal Blues, the Dave Adlers, you know, the Mark Cliffords, they all, you know, they're here, they dine at the restaurants, they can talk to local businesses. They can get behind a lot of these local events and charities, and that's the key. That's where local radio really shines. Is, you know, when Crystal is the MC at the next SPCA's banquet, you know, they're involved. You're not going to get that with a larger radio station that is coming from somewhere else. And that's what's going to keep radio relevant, as long as they stay live and local. And I think that's what we're seeing headed toward the future. Is I think you're going to see a lot of these big companies, they're just going to wave the white flag and go, okay, our thought of owning all these radio stations, it's not really working. And there's no money in it. We're going to give it back to these local mom and pop owners because they know how to run it. And I think that's happening.
So yeah, sometimes I think you can over economy of scale. Tony, you know, we mentioned about how digital works hand in hand, and we've kind of gone back and forth. And I talked about how we like multi-channel advertising. The other thing that we like to do, and I love your opinion on it, is we like to do micro campaigns, where we're able to take a fixed data set of people who we know the information for, whether it's, and then take that information and use that in our digital media so that we can target messages. Do you have any input on some of those things?
You know, that's a practice that's very common in the digital marketplace. There could be a campaign that creates like 200 different banner ads and places them on websites all over the place. And then they just pull the levers on which ones are working better than others and run more of those. And the ones that aren't working or performing well, then they scale those back. And I think you're doing the same thing. You are kind of experimenting in the field, or you are your word is micro-targeting, but it's the feedback that you're going to get. If the message is resonating, if you tailor it so much, then do more of that. It's labor intensive to do that for every single one of your consumers. So you have to kind of leverage the tools that you have. Some media can do that really well, like with digital, it's automated, but you can do the same thing with broadcast media because certain programming appeals to certain types of customers. You could run one ad in the morning versus what you want to run in the evening. So you have the flexibility. And it sounds like you've got a good partner there with Tom who's happy to help.
So without a doubt, we've got great partners in this town. And I can't say enough about Tom and his team out there. I want to bring it to a radio standpoint and a digital standpoint. A little funny story. I mentioned Howard Stern earlier. A good friend of mine is actually a Howard, I guess you'd call him on the Whack Pack. But he owns a dealership. Mm-hmm. And every single time that Howard mentions his name in passing, his site almost crashes because of how quickly people will go from listening to Howard to going to his website. Now, using that as an example would be great if you could get my website to crash every time you mention my name on the radio. But that's an important aspect. So when you talk about websites for people, and we're talking about websites, the ability to have information that's being talked about on the radio, but then have it on your site to be relevant is an incredibly important part of this. Am I not mistaken?
Right. I mean, and that's where a lot of local stations are really excelling, is everything that they do on the radio ends up on their website information-wise. And I'll tell you a quick Howard Stern story, real quick. I met him when I was first getting into the business 35 years ago, and when he was at DC 101, and because Robin Quivers, his co-host, was a year ahead of me in school. So Robin got a couple of us in to interview Howard Stern. And the thing that Howard Stern told me is, you're never going to make it in this business unless you get fired at least once.
Well, he got fired.
He got fired a couple of times.
Well, I'll tell you the story also about how he became friends with my other dealer friend. Is he bought his ad from Howard, and then later when Howard did the ad, he just roasted him for like 15 minutes. And then after that 15-minute roasting, my buddy called and was like, "Oh my God, you made me look like a fool." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I talked about you for 15 minutes."
Yeah.
I mean, people, trust me, people are going to love you.
Yeah.
And after that, it became a relationship. But that goes back to the power of local.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Howard's not local anymore,
Right.
but the fact that he was talking and he was willing to engage in his advertisers, he was engaging in his clients, he's engaging in his listeners, it makes a difference.
Right.
And if you don't have that, you're not going to get that nationally for the most part.
Sure, and I think when you go take radio backwards, it used to be you had to have a radio voice, and
Like you do.
yeah, like I do. You have to.
I got the face for radio, so we're okay.
But now what has happened is, if we just had quote disc jockeys to intro and outro songs, I think radio would have died about 10 years ago. It's all about personality. Mm-hmm. You could have not the worst radio voice, but just an okay voice, as long as it's not like nails on a chalkboard. If you can engage people and bring people into you, and they know you, and you're their friend on the radio, you're the winner. You're the personality. But if you're just hey, that was Queen, you're not going to make it in this business right now.
No, you have to. That's the same, I think, in any business. I met a guy who was a fishing boat captain, and one of my other friends asked him what's the most important classes to take to be a fishing boat captain, and he goes, go to business school, learn how to sell, learn how to market your business. Learning to fish is easy. And my friend was like, what? He goes, you have no idea how hard it is to be a business owner. Fishing is the easy part. So
Yeah.
it makes sense. So Tony, is there anything else that we haven't touched base on?
Well, I guess I would just mention that it's hard to understand this, but radio is the #1 reach medium. There are more people that tune into radio every week than there are that watch television, go on the internet, use their mobile phones. It is hard to understand because you can't see it, you can't touch it. But the relationship that people have with the on-air talent it's unparalleled. And it's just like what you guys were talking about with Howard Stern, but there's other people out there that have their own Howard Stern, and they have a relationship with them that is very strong. It's hard for us to measure it at Nielsen. So we do the easy stuff, which is hours and minutes of listening and tuning. But when it comes to that personal relationship, it's pretty unique.
No, I would say you're right. I mean, anytime that you're inviting someone into your car with you, inviting into your business with you, and inviting into your house with you, it is an extension of who you are, and that person has to resonate with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think, Tony, also television advertising, I think there's a misconception that during the shutdown that everybody was just locked up at home watching television, and that ratings must be out the window. But that's not necessarily the case. It went up a little bit, I think.
Yeah, it kind of peaked around March 23rd when everything was kind of going wacky. It has been slowly getting back to normal. Viewership levels in the most recent data I just saw yesterday showed that viewership for television nationally on average is actually lower than what it was at this time, same time last year. And that's partly because June is a major sports month, and we don't have major sports championships happening for basketball and hockey and so many others, that much of that viewership on television just isn't happening. So I think people are getting a little bit fatigued with their screens, and they're outside like I am to a greater degree. But we'll have to see if that continues.
Well, you also remember, we have to keep in mind that TV shows aren't in production. So even after this is over, we're still going to have a lag before we see anything new.
Sure.
So fresh content is always going to be important. I guess it'll be more of The Bachelor and Survivor on TV or something like that. So, Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. Tom, thank you. I know it was a long trip for you from right across the street.
It was across the street.
Yeah, from across the street. This is Tim Pohanka. It's been a Fredericksburg Strong episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Fredericksburg Strong podcast. Be sure to visit fredericksburgstrong.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content, as well as submit a request for you or your organization to appear on one of our future episodes. See you next time with another exciting episode of Fredericksburg Strong.